The words hit me like ice water as I stood frozen in the doorway of my childhood kitchen, grocery bags still clutched in my trembling hands. "She always fixes everything for us," my mother Linda was announcing to the cluster of neighbors gathered around our worn oak table, her voice bright with that particular brand of pride that made my stomach clench. "Sheila will save the vineyard just like she saved Erica's boutique and that restaurant disaster." They were discussing my money again, planning my financial future without me, as if I were some kind of family trust fund rather than a living, breathing person with dreams of my own. The familiar scent of my mother's coffee mingled with the autumn air drifting through the open window, but all I could taste was the bitter reality of what I was hearing. My name is Sheila Patterson, and at 35 years old, I've been serving as the family's personal ATM for 15 long years. While my younger sister Erica gets praised for her entrepreneurial spirit and creative vision, I'm the one who quietly writes the checks when her brilliant ideas inevitably crumble into expensive ruins. Today, standing in this house where I grew up believing family meant love and support, I watched my parents promise a room full of neighbors that I would fund yet another one of Erica's spectacular failures, the vineyard. That 20-acre mistake they'd gifted her 3 years ago as a graduation present was hemorrhaging money faster than a punctured artery, and somehow, once again, it had become my responsibility to stop the bleeding. $250,000 should cover the debts and get us back on track, my father Martin continued, stirring his coffee with the casual air of someone discussing weekend weather rather than $250,000 of someone else's life savings. "Sheila's always been so generous with family. She understands what's really important." The groceries slipped from my numb fingers, hitting the linoleum with a sharp crack that echoed through the suddenly quiet kitchen. Every face in that room turned toward me, wearing identical expressions of expectant confidence. They weren't asking if I would help. They were announcing that I already had. Growing up in the Patterson household meant learning your place in the family hierarchy before you could tie your own shoes. Erica, 3 years younger and blessed with golden hair that caught sunlight like spun silk, had always been the daughter who got dance lessons, art classes, and endless encouragement to follow her dreams. She possessed an infectious laugh that charmed every adult she met and a natural charisma that made people want to help her succeed. I was the other daughter. The practical one. The responsible one who got lectures about being realistic and thinking about the future. When Erica wanted to start her first business at 22, our parents mortgaged their house to help her launch what they called an investment in her potential. When I expressed interest in pursuing landscape architecture at 25, they suggested I stick with my accounting job because it offered more security. The pattern had been established so gradually that I didn't recognize it until I was already trapped inside it. Erica would chase her latest passion with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never experienced genuine consequences. She'd throw herself into each new venture with zero business sense but maximum excitement, spending more time planning grand opening parties than learning basic financial management. When creditors started calling and reality began to intrude on her dreams, Erica would dissolve into tears and run to our parents, who would immediately pick up the phone to call me. "Family helps family," Martin would say, as if that help only flowed in one direction. "You know how hard this is for her," Linda would add, as if Erica's failures were tragic accidents rather than predictable consequences of her refusal to learn from experience. The vineyard was supposed to be different. After her boutique collapsed under the weight of inventory she couldn't sell, her catering company imploded from events she'd booked without calculating food costs, and her yoga studio lasted exactly 6 months before unpaid instructors and landlord disputes forced her to abandon the lease. Erica announced she was ready for something more serious and mature. Our parents purchased 20 acres of prime land near the Columbia River and presented it to her on her 32nd birthday, complete with a ribbon-wrapped deed and tears of joy. "This time will be different," Linda assured me when I quietly questioned the wisdom of such an expensive gift. "Erica's really committed to making this work." I watched my sister hire an expensive consultant whose credentials looked impressive on paper, install elaborate irrigation systems she didn't understand, and plan a launch party that cost more than most people's annual salaries. She called it investing in the brand. The consultant spoke eloquently about soil composition and climate considerations while charging premium fees for advice that sounded sophisticated but proved worthless when applied to actual farming. Within 18 months, the vineyard was drowning in debt. Erica had ordered premium vine varieties without researching what actually grew well in Washington's climate. She'd hired too many seasonal workers without understanding labor costs, bought expensive equipment she couldn't operate, and spent thousands on marketing materials for wine that didn't exist yet. The expensive consultant had vanished when his retainer ran out, leaving behind impressive reports and no practical knowledge. Meanwhile, I'd been quietly building my own dreams while my family assumed that my money would always be available for their emergencies. They never asked about my goals because they never imagined I had any beyond serving as their financial safety net. My successful freelance accounting practice had grown beyond their awareness, bringing in corporate clients who paid premium rates for discreet financial consulting. I specialized in helping family businesses resolve exactly the kinds of problems that were destroying ventures like Erica's Vineyard. The irony wasn't lost on me that I spent my days helping other families solve their dysfunction while enabling my own family's toxic patterns. But while they assumed I lived paycheck to paycheck like most single women in their 30s, I'd actually been accumulating substantial savings toward a goal they knew nothing about. The mountain cabin I'd been researching represented everything I wanted that my family had never encouraged me to pursue. Located 2 hours north of Spokane near Sheila, the property included 40 acres of pristine forest, a renovated log home with solar power, and views of the Columbia River Valley that took my breath away every time I drove up to walk the property. The asking price was exactly what my parents now expected me to donate to Erica's Vineyard revival, but it was also exactly what I needed to finally build the life I'd been dreaming about since college. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in September when I arrived at the family house expecting a casual coffee with my mother. Instead, I walked into a room full of neighbors, local business owners, and wine enthusiasts, all gathered to hear about what Linda called the exciting Vineyard Revival Project. My mother beamed as she explained how her responsible older daughter would be providing the funding to transform Erica's struggling vineyard into a premier destination winery. Sheila's always been the generous one, she told Mr. Peterson from the hardware store. She understands that family investment is the best investment. I stood frozen in that doorway, listening to my mother describe elaborate plans I'd never heard before. A new tasting room with panoramic windows, expanded production facilities with state-of-the-art equipment, comprehensive marketing campaigns targeting wine tourists, and staff increases to handle the anticipated crowds. All funded by the $250,000 they'd decided I would donate without bothering to ask my opinion. Martin stepped forward to add technical details about soil improvement and equipment upgrades, speaking with the confident authority of someone who'd never grown anything more complex than tomatoes in his backyard garden. The assembled crowd nodded appreciatively, already picturing themselves attending harvest festivals and wine tastings at what they believed would soon be the Patterson family's thriving winery. "When will construction begin?" asked Melissa Crawford, who owned the local flower shop. "We're hoping to coordinate our fall festival with your grand reopening." Linda glanced at me with the confident smile I'd seen her use when promising things she had no power to deliver. "Sheila and Erica are still working out the final details, but we expect to break ground before winter." The assumption in her voice made my chest tighten with anger I'd been suppressing for years. They hadn't just volunteered my money, they'd committed me to a timeline and created public expectations without a single conversation about whether I was willing to participate. Erica bounced into the room at that moment, wearing a sundress that probably cost more than most families spent on groceries in a month. She launched into an animated description of her vision for the vineyard's future, complete with dramatic hand gestures and carefully rehearsed talking points about preserving family legacy and creating something meaningful for the community. "My sister believes in this project as much as I do," she announced, throwing her arm around my shoulders before I could step away. "She knows how important it is to keep our family's dreams alive." The weight of her arm felt like chains anchoring me to obligations I'd never agreed to accept. As the neighbors filed out an hour later, chattering excitedly about wine tastings and harvest dinners they expected to attend, I remained silent, watching my parents bustle around clearing coffee cups and pastries, their movements animated by the successful performance they'd just delivered. They'd promised my money to fund Erica's recovery from her latest failure, and they'd done it publicly, making refusal seem selfish and cruel. But as I watched Erica scroll through her phone, probably planning her next expensive purchase with money she didn't have, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. For the first time in 15 years, the word no felt not just possible, but absolutely necessary. The week following their public announcement felt like being trapped underwater while the surface grew further and further away. Everywhere I went in Spokane, people congratulated me on supporting family business and asked when they could visit the renovated vineyard. Mr. Thompson at the bank mentioned how wonderful it was to see siblings working together. The cashier at the grocery store said her book club was already planning a wine tasting tour. Each conversation added weight to the commitment my parents had made on my behalf, creating a web of public expectation that seemed impossible to escape. Without looking like a monster who destroyed her family's dreams out of pure spite, Erica, emboldened by what she perceived as guaranteed funding, began spending with renewed enthusiasm. She hired a public relations firm to develop marketing materials for the vineyard's rebirth, ordered custom labels from a boutique designer in Portland, and scheduled meetings with distributors who specialized in premium wines. When I called to discuss the financial assumptions our parents had made, she laughed off my concerns with the practiced ease of someone who'd never faced real consequences. "Don't worry about the details," she said, as if my life savings were minor logistics to be handled later. "The important thing is that we're finally going to have something the whole family can be proud of." That Friday afternoon, I drove out to see the current state of Erica's agricultural empire. What I found was 20 acres of dying vines, broken irrigation equipment rusting in the September sun, and a barn filled with expensive machinery that hadn't been maintained properly. The soil looked depleted and cracked, suggesting Erica had never learned about proper fertilization or water management. Weeds grew between the vine rows like accusations, and several sections showed clear signs of disease that could have been prevented with basic care. Walking through that neglected vineyard, I calculated the real cost of restoration in my head. The $250,000 my parents had promised wouldn't begin to address the fundamental problems Erica had created. The soil would need extensive rehabilitation, the irrigation system required complete replacement, and most of the vines would have to be replanted with varieties actually suited to Washington's climate. Even with unlimited funding, turning this disaster into a profitable winery would take years of dedicated work from someone who understood agriculture, business management, and wine production. Erica possessed none of those skills and had shown no interest in developing them. Standing among those dying vines, I realized my parents' announcement hadn't been about family support or business investment. It had been about avoiding the social embarrassment of admitting their golden child had failed again. They'd promised my money to maintain Erica's image and their own, sacrificing my financial security to preserve family pride. That evening, I sat in my apartment reviewing financial documents I'd been quietly accumulating for 3 years. My freelance accounting practice had grown beyond anyone's expectations, bringing in corporate clients who paid premium rates for discreet financial consulting. While my family assumed I scraped by like most single women, I'd actually built substantial savings through careful planning and hard work. The mountain cabin represented everything I'd wanted but never been encouraged to pursue. The property included enough space for organic gardens, hiking trails, and maybe even a small workshop for the furniture making and landscape design hobbies I'd never had time to explore because I was always managing someone else's crisis. I made the call to my real estate agent that night, authorizing her to submit a full-price cash offer with expedited closing. For the first time in months, I felt the excitement of pursuing something I wanted rather than something my family needed. The next morning brought a call from Martin demanding a meeting to finalize the vineyard investment details. His tone carried the assumption that my participation was guaranteed, that we were simply arranging logistics rather than discussing whether I would contribute anything at all. I agreed to meet them the following Sunday, letting them believe we were gathering to sign papers and transfer money. But instead of preparing financial documents, I spent the weekend packing boxes and arranging for my most valuable possessions to be moved to storage. Sunday afternoon arrived with the crisp clarity that only September in eastern Washington can deliver. I drove to my parents' house with a manila envelope containing documents that would end 15 years of financial servitude, my hands steady on the steering wheel despite the magnitude of what I was about to do. Martin and Linda had arranged the dining room like a boardroom, with legal pads, calculators, and financial documents spread across the table. Erica sat at the head wearing a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than most people earned in a week, her laptop open to what appeared to be a presentation about vineyard expansion plans. They'd prepared as if this was a board meeting, where my participation was simply a formality to be documented rather than a decision to be made. "We've broken down the investment into phases," Linda began, sliding a typed document across the table. The numbers totaled far more than the original $250,000 they'd mentioned to the neighbors. Somehow, my parents had inflated their expectations. While planning my financial contribution, Erica launched into her presentation with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never experienced genuine business failure. She clicked through slides showing architectural renderings of tasting rooms, marketing plans targeting wine tourists, and projected revenue streams that assumed immediate success in a notoriously difficult industry. "The consultant believes we can break even within 18 months, she announced confidently, apparently forgetting that her last consultant had led her directly into the current financial disaster. I listened to their presentation in silence, letting them build momentum with their assumptions and expectations. They painted pictures of family legacy, tourist attractions, and profitable partnerships, all funded by my savings and built on Erica's track record of spectacular failure. When they finished, the room fell quiet as they waited for my signature on documents that would transform their dreams into my financial nightmare. "That's quite a plan," I said finally, opening my manila envelope and placing my own documents on the table. The property deed was printed on official county paper with my name listed as buyer and a closing date from 3 days earlier. The purchase Price was clearly visible, along with certification showing I'd paid cash for the entire transaction. Martin picked up the deed with confusion spreading across his face as he processed what he was reading. Linda leaned over his shoulder, her expression shifting from confident expectation to shocked disbelief as she realized the implications. "You bought a cabin?" Linda's voice cracked with disbelief. "When? How? We thought you were saving money for the family investment." The word family came out as an accusation, as if my decision to spend my own money on my own dreams was somehow a betrayal of sacred obligations I'd never agreed to accept. "It's not family money," I replied calmly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the anger radiating from 3 pairs of eyes across the table. "It's my money, earned through my business, saved through my sacrifices, and spent on my decision." The confrontation that followed was everything I'd imagined and dreaded for years. Martin accused me of selfishness. Linda questioned my loyalty to family values. Erica dissolved into tears over the unfairness of being held responsible for her own business decisions, but their anger couldn't touch me because I'd finally stopped caring about their approval. The cabin deed in my hands represented freedom from their cycle of crisis and expectation, and no amount of guilt or manipulation could make me surrender that independence. "You've always been jealous of Erica," Linda declared, playing the card she'd used to dismiss my concerns for decades. "This is your way of punishing her for being successful and creative while you're stuck in boring accounting work." "I'm not punishing anyone," I said, standing to leave before their emotional manipulation could gain momentum. "I'm simply refusing to fund another one of Erica's failures. The vineyard lost money because she made poor decisions, not because she lacked adequate investment." As I walked toward the door, I could hear Erica's voice rising behind me, asking who would tell the neighbors about the changed plans and how she would explain the project's cancellation to people who were expecting vineyard tours and wine tastings. For the first time in 15 years, those problems belonged entirely to her. Martin, Linda, and Erica faced immediate social humiliation when word spread throughout Spokane that the promised vineyard revival had collapsed. Neighbors who had planned harvest festivals felt deceived, while local business owners who had expected tourist traffic expressed disappointment at being misled. Erica was eventually forced into bankruptcy when creditors realized no family bailout was forthcoming, and the vineyard property was seized and sold at auction. The beautiful mountain cabin became my sanctuary, a place where I could pursue landscape architecture projects while consulting remotely for clients who valued my expertise, without expecting me to sacrifice my own goals for their success. As I watched the sunrise paint the Columbia River Valley in shades of gold each morning, I understood the most valuable lesson of all: the word "no" isn't selfish when it protects your right to choose your own happiness. Sometimes the greatest act of family loyalty is refusing to enable the very behaviors that are destroying the people you love. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this story moved you, and remember, your dreams matter just as much as anyone else's.